Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Hello friends! Okay, today I have my weekly reading wrap up. I started doing these last week just to kind of give myself a little bit of a break from vlogging, and it's been really fun. I really have enjoyed the last few weeks where I feel like I have a little bit more freedom to kind of read whatever, and that all of this is like self-imposed, right? And not feel like it has to fit into like a weekly vlog where I start and finish at the same time, you know? So I feel like I was able to kind of follow my whims a little more as far as reading went, and I really enjoyed that. So let's talk about the books that I read. I read 7 books this week, and here we go. We're gonna get right into it. So the first book that I read was Ivan by Sophie Lark. This is the first book in her Underworld series. But the interesting thing is, Jessin was telling me, is that Ivan, the first 3 books in this series were not actually the first books that she wrote in the series. These came later on, and then she rearranged the series and put these at the beginning, which I think is really smart because this book was fantastic. And I haven't read some of the earlier books that she wrote in the series, but I have heard that, you know, as with any author, their writing is going to grow stronger the longer that they write and the longer that they work on their talent. So I adored this book. This was a 5-star read for me. I loved it so much. It's very short. It's only like 250 pages, but it was so good. And I've had a few people ask, since I've been talking about Sophie Lark so much recently, where is a good place to start with her? And I think this, if you're brand new to her, is a perfect place to start because it is short. It's 250 pages, but it's very good, and it really highlights what Sophie does best with very alpha heroes and strong, intelligent women that really make this perfect pairing together. And I just adored this book, honestly. I mean, I've talked a lot about how I'm not a huge fan of shorter books. Like, I feel like it's a pretty rare thing for me to feel completely satisfied with a shorter book. And this, I felt like, was perfect. I could have read like a 400-page book with these characters, but I mean, just because I loved the characters and I loved their story, but I also felt just completely 100% satisfied with this story in itself, and I would reread this over and over again. I loved it so much. So this was a 5-star read. This book has our heroine Sloane, she is basically like a self-made assassin. Her dad was in the CIA, and she is an American who has moved to Russia. She's moved to Russia to find her dad, who she believes is there. He told her he was there for a military assignment, and so she's been trying to find him. She did find out what happened to him, but I'm not going to tell you that because it is a little bit spoilery. But as she is over there, her dad kind of trained her and raised her growing up to, like, he was a very paranoid man because he knew of the dangers that the world had, so he trained her and prepared her how to avoid basically like capture, how to get through torture for information, and like all these other things. So she's a very capable, very confident woman. She is lethal, and she has kind of built herself into this self-made assassin where she essentially is a hitwoman. She takes jobs and she goes and kills people, and that was very interesting. So one of the first hits that she has in the book gives her some information that leads her to the ultimate plot of the story. And another hit that she gets, which is right after that opening scene, is to go and kill Ivan, who is the hero. And she goes on this job. She's going to inject him with this poison, and she has this moment where she sees him laying in bed, and she's just struck with his beauty and his power and his sensuality, and she hesitates for a minute. She hesitates about killing him, and that is when he wakes up and realizes what is happening, and it was just so delicious. Like, they gave me a lot of like Mr. and Mrs. Smith vibes, which I loved, and I felt like they had combustible chemistry from the moment that they met. And I really loved, and I think this is something that Sophie does really well, I loved how she convinces you so easily that Ivan sees this woman and he is just transfixed with her. Like, he sees that she's about to kill him, and he's equal parts intrigued and sort of obviously irritated. You know, he's a very powerful man, so he doesn't really feel like he's in a lot of danger, although Sloane is a very dangerous woman herself. but he just has this, like, a lot of complex feelings about her, where he doesn't treat her, like, he doesn't just kill her off the bat. He ends up capturing her, so you have a little bit of a captor-captive romance in here. And he does end up trying to torture her, but I don't feel like it ever goes too far. It never goes into that territory of just a really degradation, violent, torturing scenario in a captor-captive romance. Like, and that's largely because of how Sophie convinces you that his feelings for Sloane are very complex, even though he doesn't even know her. He's just basing all of this off of, a lot of it is attraction, but a lot of it too is just how intrigued he is with her intelligence and her confidence and her bravery. Like, he's just completely smitten with her, basically, but not in a love-struck way, but also not in a purely lust-driven way, although there is a heavy emphasis of that too. Like, it was just absolutely compelling. And Sloane feels very similarly. Like, from the first moment that she saw him, she was feeling a little bit of maybe sorrow that she had to kill him. Like, oh, it was just so good. So it's their romance, and there is a little bit of a bigger plot in here based on what happens in the opening scene, some information that you have there. And it's basically these two starting off as enemies. She was sent to kill him for her job, and then they end up falling in love. And I just feel like that is a very unlikely scenario, and something that is, I mean, honestly, that's the romance that I want. That synopsis right there is the romance that I want, but I feel like it is very, very rarely pulled off in a way that is satisfying, and in a way that I'm able to suspend my disbelief and completely believe that this would actually be a romance. So I loved this book. This is definitely one of my favorites that Sophie has ever written. It's fantastic. So if you are looking for a place to start with Sophie's books, I would highly recommend this because it was fantastic. Loved it so much. Okay, the next book that I read is The Rogue by Catherine Ash. This is the first book in her Devil's Duke series. A few weeks ago or last month, I read the third book in this series, which is The Duke, which ended up being one of my favorite books of the year. It was a really beautiful romance with a naval captain and a pastor's wife, and it was just, I mean, she was a widow, but it was just such an epic, beautiful, sweeping romance. It felt very old-fashioned. It felt like a period drama enacted before my eyes. Like, I loved it so much. So I really wanted to go back to the first of this series after I read The Duke and The Prince, which are the last two. So this is The Rogue, and this audiobook was really hard for me to find, actually. So I saw the only audiobook copy that I could find was at my library, but there was a pretty big hold for it. So I had to wait several weeks to get this, and it just barely came up for me to listen to, so I immediately listened to it, and I have to say that I was kind of disappointed in this book. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It did have that same quality of writing that I really loved about The Duke. Like, it had a very, like, there's this book, this whole series, each book spans several years. It has a very epic setting. There's, the heroines in here are always sort of looking for justice for these women who have been kidnapped or have been killed. They've come up missing, and they're trying to find out who is responsible for these, and they believe it is the Duke who is actually the hero in book 3. And so everything that the heroine does in here is sort of to prove that he is guilty and get justice for these young women. She is raised by her father, who is in the Falcon Club. The Falcon Club is another series that Catherine Ash has written, and that, again, has this big overarching plot thread. Like, the whole theme of that book is they're trying to find justice for women who have been misused by men, which I really, really like. So her father, the heroine in here, I believe her name is Constance. Yeah, Lady Constance. She was really raised by her father to go and be one of these, like, sort of vigilantes who are looking for justice for these young women. So he makes sure that she's trained in all of these different aspects, and one thing that he wants her to be trained in is, like, sword fighting, or, like, fencing, but, you know, sword fighting, basically. And so he ends up pairing her with who's going to be her teacher. His name is Saint, and he comes against his will because he's retired. He doesn't really want to be teaching, and he especially doesn't want to be teaching a young woman, but he agrees, and he comes to teach this one young woman. And lo and behold, they both realize that they knew each other 6 years previously when they had this very romantic hookup, basically. And his heart was broken because she left him. And she had this one passionate night with him, and she ended up leaving him. It's very complicated reasons for why she left him. That's something that I think went a little too far here. I feel like the plot and everything in the characters' lives, it was a little too complicated. I felt like it would have been a better cohesive story if it had been streamlined and not had so many different complications, because it just felt like these characters just had setback after setback and all of these things they had to deal with. Constance ends up, after that night she had with Saint, which was passionate, but she ended up leaving him, broke his heart, basically, and goes about her journey to try and bring justice for these women who are missing. She ends up in a situation where she is a victim of sexual assault that it really haunts her entire life and haunts her interactions with Saint. And that was one of my favorite moments in this book, actually, is when she confesses to Saint what happened to her and his reaction to that. It was really beautiful, and I think it's everything that you would hope that your partner would experience and express when you share something like that with them. That was really, really beautiful. But overall, I felt like, other than the fact that the plot in this was extremely complicated, overcomplicated, where it felt like everything was watered down and the romance really kind of got lost, but my major gripe with this book was really the heroine. I feel like I've complained several times before. One of my least favorite things about historical romance or romance novels in general is when the hero acts in a way, all of his choices that he's making for his life or for them together basically strip the heroine of her choice. So she has no choice other than to do what the hero wants. And I feel like even if that is done out of love, that's something that I don't love seeing that in a romance, because when you take away the person that you loved, their choices, how do they really love you because their choice is gone? You're not leaving them with any options. You are their only option, you know? And it just doesn't speak to love it to me in that way. So I have a really hard time getting behind heroes who behave that way. And I was very surprised that in this book, the heroine is actually the one who does that to the hero. All of the choices that she has made have wrapped him in her life and in this plot against his will, basically, where he doesn't have any other option other than to aid her in her choices. And she wants him to, because he's such a powerful man who would help her in her cause. But because of how she behaved and how she sort of stripped his choices from him and left it so that that was his only option, it just made it really unbelievable. Their love story was just so unbelievable, which really makes me sad, because there was like a fencing scene in here that was so hot and I just loved it so much. And there was also the opening scene when they meet when they're young that was extremely beautiful and romantic. But those, like the way that she behaved towards him, how she really sort of underhandedly, and like it feels like such a rare thing for a heroine to do in a historical, because those choices aren't options for them, you know? So it was surprising in that way, but I also hated it, because I just hate to see either party strip the person that they love's choices away so that they have to do what this other person wants them to do. You know what I mean? Like, I just hate that. That doesn't say love to me in any way, and it was disappointing. So this had Catherine's really beautiful, typical writing style, and I really, really like that. I do feel like the storytelling was a little watered down here. But yeah, the heroine, I was so disappointed. So 3 stars for this one. Okay, the next book that I read is Runaway Road by Devney Perry. This is the first book in a small town romance series of hers that she has. And because I loved the Clifton Forge series so much, and I kind of had really not loved the Rogue, I really wanted something that I thought, okay, I know I'm going to love this author's writing, I know this is probably going to be a pick-me-up read and comforting, and I just wanted to read it. So I decided to start with this series, because another reason I did is all these audiobooks are very short, like they're only like 6 hours long, so I thought this will just be great, I could listen to this in a day and boost of serotonin. And that's exactly what I got here. This book was so sweet. I really, really loved it. I love Devney Perry's small town romances. I feel like she captures that feeling of a small town and community that is just so beautiful, where everyone feels like a part of a family, and I just love that so much. So this book follows London, our heroine, and this series all features characters who had a really terrible childhood. They had situations that were heartbreaking, some abusive, some tragic things happened to them, and they run away from their home, and they end up banded together in basically a trailer park or rundown situation, and they are living there as teenagers. So that's how they know each other. That's how the books are all connected. And then they go on to live their lives. And in this book, London ends up having a pretty successful life. She is married, she is wealthy, she has everything that textbook seems perfect in her life. She ends up receiving some devastating news about her husband. She gets a divorce, and she decides she's going to run away. And so she takes her car, which is a Cadillac that she basically like restored. That was her way out. That was what she lived in when she was a runaway, and she decides she's going to take it back to that town that she grew up in and return it to a boy that she had history with back there. So it's a road trip romance type of thing. But along the way, she ends up getting a flat tire in this very small town and ends up meeting our hero. So our hero in this book is Brooks Cohen, and he is a delicious hero. He is a very strong alpha man. He is also divorced. He has a grown son, and I liked that the characters in here were a little bit older. They weren't just your young 20-year-olds. They were in their 30s. They had life decisions. They had a little bit of baggage, and so this was really them sort of trying to find happiness through that, and happiness through some really sad situations. And I loved this romance. I felt like I don't really want to give a lot of the plot away, but also there's not a ton of plot happening here. This is just, you know, their backstory situations. She ends up in this small town. Has a flat tire. She tries to get that fixed. She has this connection with Brooks. And then she struggles with, do I leave or do I stay? Do I stay here and try and make something work with him, or do I keep going on? You know, and because of what's happened to her in her marriage, she's a little scared to trust again. And it was just beautiful. I really, really loved it. I gave this one 4 stars. I feel like if this is one of the shortest books in the series, and I feel like if it had been a little bit longer, I would have been fully satisfied. This is another case of where a short book didn't completely satisfy me on the romance. I would have loved it to be a little bit longer so we could have really developed the feelings a little stronger. I feel like that would have been justified in here, especially because she ends up in this town she didn't plan to go to. She just came from getting her heart broken, and I would have liked a little more time to see her trust and love him before she was just so ready to stake a chance on them together. However, I will say it wasn't like a deal breaker. I still really loved it. It was 4 stars. It was great, and I really enjoyed my time reading this. Okay, so then I went on to the second book in this series, which is, I keep forgetting the titles of, whenever I read books in a series, I'm like, what's the title again? I can't remember. Okay, this one is Wild Highway. This is the second book in this Devney Perry series, and this book follows a heroine who we meet in the first book who is friends with London, who is the main character. Her name is Gemma, and Gemma was also in a situation where she was a runaway. She's actually the one who found London when they were teens and brought her back to like the junkyard, and they had their own little tiny teenage refugee community there. So Gemma has stayed friends with London, and Gemma has made a fortune basically for herself. She is a self-made woman. She has been extremely successful in her business ventures, and she is kind of like a millionaire. So she is also sort of feeling this pull of unhappiness in her life. She wants something more. She's not satisfied with the money and the career and everything. So she gets an offer to buy her business, basically, and it's a very lucrative offer, and she's sort of like feeling over with that business world, so she's like, yeah, okay, I'll sell it to you. So she sells it, and she also decides that she's going to go on a road trip, and she takes over the burden, not really the burden, but she takes over the job that London had of driving this Cadillac back to California to the boy that they knew there. So Gemma takes on the second leg of this journey. She's driving this Cadillac there, and she ends up stopping in this Montana town where she lived for a while in her youth. And she had a job there, and she had some roots there. She had some friends and family. And she ends up stopping there because she feels like called back to visit these people one more time. She's a little bit worried about how they're going to accept her because she kind of left in a hurry and left not really with bad terms, but with things that were unfinished. And she did end up having a little bit of a fling with a man there who she had a thing with, and then she ended up leaving. And basically she ended up breaking his heart. So when he sees her again, his name is Easton, and he is this beautiful cowboy horse rancher, is basically owning and operating this dude ranch and has plans to breed these horses. So, you know, I love horses, and I was sold on that. So he ends up seeing her again, and there's this animosity there, and he's just like not gonna cut her any slack. He's like, you broke my heart. What are you doing back here? So he's definitely grumpy with her right off the bat. Like, grumpy with her, is not gonna cut her any slack, and doesn't like that he's sort of thrown back into having this relationship again with her that he didn't really want to have. And I say relationship, like, it's just complicated because he's still close with the people that she was close that she came back to, you know. So it's one of those things where they're running into each other in this small town, and they're sort of forced into these situations, and they're both confronting the fact that they still have feelings for each other, and what do we do with these feelings? Do we act on them, and do we have a physical relationship? Do we try and make it grow a little deeper? What do we do now? And I just really loved this one. This one was 5 stars for me. I adored this book. I feel like this is Devney Perry at her best, honestly. I felt like I love a second chance romance, to be quite honest. Like, that's one of my favorite tropes, and I felt like it was done perfectly here. I felt like it had just the right amount of tension of hurt feelings and trying to work over that, and also like she's hurt and trying to trust again and not really sure if she should trust. And so like if you have trust issues or if you have problems with the heroine not really being ready to trust, like maybe this isn't for you, like maybe you won't love it as much as I did, but like I adored it. It felt very real to me. I loved their romance. I felt like it was so swoony and it was just so perfect. And this one also is set around like Thanksgiving and Christmas, which was fun at this time of year. I just loved this so much. This was so happy. I loved this. This was a 5-star read. And then I did a reread. I had 2 rereads. I'm wrapping these books up out of order. Sorry about that. So one of the rereads I had was The Highwayman by Kerrigan Byrne. This is the 3rd time that I've read this book. This is one of my all-time favorite historical romances. I was reading this for the Rake Appreciation Society live show we had with Kerrigan Byrne. That live show is on my channel. You can watch the replay of it. It's about an hour and a half. It was such an interesting interview. I just love Kerrigan Byrne. She's so real, so genuine. Like, I loved getting to chat with her about this. This is a little bit dark, broody, historical romance about these 2 kids who are in a bad situation, and like one of the things that endears me to this book so much is that opening scene where they're children in this like orphanage, and they have this little marriage ceremony, and they pledge their lives to one another, and then they're separated. And oh my gosh, I just love this book so much. I feel like most people have read this, and I just loved it. It was such a fun reread. It just hit the spot in every possible way. I love this. This is 5 stars. One of my all-time favorite books. I can't recommend this highly enough if you haven't read it yet. It's fantastic. Okay, the next book that I read was also a reread, and it was First Drop of Crimson by Janine Frost. I am desperately trying to get caught up with the Night Huntress world, and so I can read her current releases as they're coming out. I love Janine Frost. She's fantastic. This book is actually a standalone in her Night Huntress universe, but it really definitely would benefit you, I think, if you read the books in the order that Janine has set out for you, because you would miss a lot of the context of these characters' lives and the overall plot. I think it might be a little hard to follow if you weren't reading in the series, but also I feel like because it is a standalone, you could certainly try it and see what you think. So this is a paranormal romance with Slade, our hero, who is a very old vampire. He's one of Bones' friends. Bones is the vampire in the main Night Hunter series. And Slade is sort of a very broody vampire. Not Slade, I keep saying Slade, Spade. His name is Spade because he was sentenced to the prison in Australia, and the tool that he used was a spade. So that's sort of the nickname that he's given himself there, and he kind of gets teased about that. Spade actually was an earl when he was a human, so he has that very regal sort of gentility type of a hero in this book, where he's very chivalrous, even though he's in the modern world, and I just love and adore him. He's one of my favorite vampires in the whole series. And so this is the story of Spade and his romance with Denise, who is one of Kat's friends. Denise has recently suffered a bit of a loss. Her heart has been broken. She is a character who doesn't want to have anything really to do with the paranormal world, but she keeps finding herself thrust back in there. And so at this point in time, she's sort of trying to unravel a lot of her family's dark past with demons, when a demon comes to visit her and ends up basically sort of infecting her blood with demon venom or demon poison or something like that, that makes her either that could make her transition into like a demon, but also makes her blood very, very appealing to vampires. So much so that it's like sort of an addictive contraband substance where humans who have this type of demon blood in them are sort of sold on the black market, and they're very, very valuable. So Spade is trying to help her solve the mystery and hopefully get this problem fixed for her. This was a really fun read. I really enjoyed my time here. It was just like, it's very fast-paced. It's very typical Janine Frost. Fast-paced, steamy, sexy, flirty, fun, great banter, a little bit quirky, just really, really a good time. I think the only thing that makes this a 4-star read, I did give this book 4 stars, and I think the first time I read this book, I gave it 5 stars. It was a 4-star read for me only because I felt like I didn't really love Denise, and like I didn't really believe their love story as much as I wanted to. I felt like Spade was much more on board, and Denise was very reluctant, very hesitant to be with him, and I just kind of wanted her to get on board with it a little sooner. So 4 out of 5 stars for this one. Still really enjoyed it, but not as much as the other ones I've read. Okay, and the last book that I read this week was Slightly Married by Mary Billog. This book was delightful, honestly. Like, I am very excited that I finally read this book. Thank you to Linda for suggesting that I do. I really enjoyed this book. I love Mary's writing. I feel like her books are so beautiful, and they're very slow building, and I think that they're really excellent deep dives into the characters' lives, and I love how she layers her stories so gradually and so subtly with all of these. Like, you really get to know what makes these characters tick. You really get to see their motivations, and it feels so realistic, the situation that the characters are in. Like, I love how she takes something that is a very, very mundane type of look at these people's lives, even if they are dukes or lords or ladies or whatever, even if there are balls. I feel like she is able to write her stories in a way that makes you feel like this is just an everyday life in these characters' lives. You know, this is something that is mundane, but then she takes that sort of mundane quality and elevates it so that you can really see the beauty of just everyday life in this time period, and I just loved this. I really, really enjoyed this book. I did give it 4.5 stars out of 5 stars, and that's largely because I felt like there were some parts of this that were a little tiny bit slow, because she does really get you deep into the characters' lives and their backstories, and that wasn't unenjoyable, but it did feel like I was hoping for a little bit more romance a little bit sooner. Like, I'm a big fan of slow burn romance. Like, I love a good slow burn. I prefer that, honestly, rather than just bang it out right away. You know, I love slow building romances. So I think that, like, I rated this a 4-star on Goodreads, and I do feel like it's so close to a 5-star read, like, for me, but I loved reading it, but there were just, it didn't quite hit me as emotionally as I was hoping it would until the end. Like, the last 10% of this was beautiful. It had me all in my feels. Like, it was such a beautiful romance, and I was just in love with this couple. I loved it. So I'm going to stand by my rating of 4.5 stars, and I can't wait to read more in this series because I have heard that they just keep getting better, so I'm hopeful for that. So this is book 1 in the Bedouins Saga, and this is about our characters. Our heroine is Lady Ava, and she is basically a coal miner's daughter who has been elevated to a little bit of nobility because of some things that have happened in her family's life, but she definitely isn't a part of the peerage, and that's a big theme in the book, that she's basically a sort of like how they would feel about Americans, and that it's like new money type of thing, you know? She's not part of the peerage, she's not bred into this, and so that's sort of a little bit of a knock against her, in that the man that she wants to marry, sort of like her very young teenage love, his father didn't want them to marry because of the fact that she was a coal miner's daughter. The man that she loved, or she thought she loved, went to war, and they agreed that when he came back that they would marry, no matter what his parents said. So she's been waiting for him for like 20 months for him to get back. And her brother also is gone to war, so she's also waiting for her brother to get back. So an interesting situation with Eva is that her father has also passed away, and her father left the estate to her, but there are some conditions surrounding that that are kind of complicated and that feel very, very, very carefully and tightly plotted that make this exact situation work. So, her brother ends up passing away in the war, and our hero, Lord Aiden, is the one who finds her brother as he is dying, and he begs Lord Aiden to please go home and take care of his sister, make sure she's taken care of, and ask her not to wear mourning clothes for me because she's been wearing mourning clothes for her father who died. So Lord Aiden is a man who is a man of honor. Like, I feel like when we think of this time period, I think that we all love our rakes and our rogues and our scoundrels, but I love a man who is like a man of honor, and he is going to keep his word, and he has a big sense of duty. And I just love that type of hero so much, and that is exactly how Aiden was. Aiden is the second son of a duke, and so it was his responsibility to go serve in the military. So he survives, he comes back and finds Eva and tells her that her brother has passed away, and tells her that her brother said that he didn't want her to wear mourning clothes for him. And Eva is devastated at the death of her brother, but she's also thrown into this situation where the estate that was left to her was only left to her for a certain amount of time. And if she didn't marry at the end of that time, it would pass to her brother. And her brother has in his will that if something happened to him, all of it would be left to Eva. But there was this little window of time where she didn't get married, and her brother died, and so the land is not hers. And she has like 4 or 5 days to marry somebody so that the land will stay hers, or it's going to go to her cousin. So her cousin comes in and just acts like, this is my land, this is my estate, this is mine, you are just going to be gone, I'm going to just get rid of you. And Ava is a sweet, beautiful woman, and she has taken it upon herself to hire these cast-offs from society for her servants. So these are the people who wouldn't have had a job otherwise, and so she's very worried, not only about her own self getting cast off, but she's mostly worried about what's going to happen with these servants who I hired. They're not going to be able to find a home or a job or a place to work. So pretty soon, Aiden, our hero, realizes the situation, what's going to happen to Ava. And because of that, that agreement, or that oath that he took with her brother when he was dying, he takes it upon himself to propose marriage to Ava. And because she doesn't have any other option, she's only got a few days to get married and keep this estate for herself, even though she feels like she's in love with this other man, this man that they had this bargain with, she agrees. And so they get married. And I felt like this was just such an interesting take on a marriage of convenience, where it's not because they got ruined. It's not because their family wanted them to. It is because they, fortunes and estates are involved. But it was just such an interesting look at Aiden's character, and I felt like Mary really does this with her heroes a lot of the time, where she makes them these men of honor, these men of duty. They're going to do the right thing most of the time, and I loved how that was the driving force of his character. So the book takes a very long time for these two to get to know each other, because they're essentially strangers, and Eva definitely has this feeling of admiration for Aiden, and also gratitude, and she's trying to reconcile that with these feelings that she's having, and she's trying to decide, are these love? Am I falling in love with him? It was such a beautiful love story. I adored watching them very slowly, very gradually fall in love. And I will say too that this has one of the driest and just most interesting first sex scenes that I've ever read, because they're both they're newly married, and it's not on their wedding night, but it comes soon after, and they have this moment where they're just like, well, I guess we should do this, and she's like, yeah, okay, I'm game. Oh, by the way, I'm not a virgin. And it was just so interesting. It's different. I love Mary's books because they're so different than, I think, a typical historical romance. They're very much character studies, and I love that. So this was a good one. I really enjoyed this, and I can't wait to read more in this series. So 4.5 stars, high 4 stars for this one. Really, really liked it. I thought it was fantastic. And again, like the last 10%, honestly, just almost pushed it to a 5-star because it was so romantic and it was so beautiful, and I just loved watching them finally come together. I just sort of wish that that happened a little bit earlier, you know what I mean? But still, a great one. Really enjoyed it. Can't wait to read more in this series. So, alright, those are the books that I read this week. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Let me know, let me know what you read this week, if it was good. I don't know how to close these videos anymore. And feel free to leave me a doggo emoji for Kazi if you don't mind. If you would like to, that would be great. And I'll see y'all in my next video.